Hello, my name is Patrick Usher, and in this video I wish to discuss inculcating a gentle discipline through the process of recovering from POTS using the DNRS program, or Dynamic Neural Retraining System. This is an important topic because, as anyone who has engaged in the brain rewiring program that is the DNRS will know, it is something to be lived, something to be done. It's not something you intellectualize or sit down and think about. It is very much a practice of action. You are constantly rewiring your brain throughout the day. And so one needs to have an attitude, a disciplined attitude, which supports that practice. Otherwise, it simply cannot take effect, because it can only take effect from the actual doing of it. So I want to talk about that today. And I've called this a gentle discipline because while it is a discipline, it should also be a joyful thing. In life, when we have times and periods of our lives when we do need to have discipline, this shouldn't conjure up images of 1950s schools. This is about creating an environment and attitude which supports you in your higher goals and aims. And when you have POTS, this higher goal, the higher goal of recovery, needs to be supported at all costs. So it's about trying to establish environment and routines that will support you in that, and of course willpower. Now, we only have so much willpower, which is why we also need environments, set up our environment well and our routines well. And this is a point I made in another video, which I've taken from a DNRS recovery testimonial video where someone was interviewed about their experience. But it's very important to recognize that it's a full-time job being sick. And it's also a full-time job recovering. And so you have a choice between one or the other. And although, yes, it's hard and requires discipline and effort to do the exercises consistently, to rewire your brain over such a long period of time. But the alternative is harder. The alternative where you remain with the illness and the psychological torture that goes with being trapped in such a horrible set of symptoms is far worse. So you have that choice to make. And in fact, although this was something that I thought myself during recovery, but although I absolutely believe, for all the reasons I put forward on this channel and in my book, that the DNRS does rewire the root cause of POTS, it also helped me to think at the time, even if this were not rewiring the root cause, would I still want to do the practice anyway? And because I found the practice so life-affirming and joyful, the answer to that would be yes. And to me, the practice really speaks to the soul. So, whether the soul exists or not, but it certainly felt that way to me. So, would I want to do it anyway? Would it be a better choice anyway? Regardless of using it to recover from an illness, would it still be a soul-filled way of life? And the answer to that for me is yes. So, that's another thing to say. So on the one hand, you have a choice between full-time job being sick or full-time job trying to recover, and which of those you want to choose. And secondly, regardless of recovery, although you will, I've no doubt, would you want to do the practice anyway? And that's an important question to ask. Okay. So some specific tips and thoughts on maintaining and establishing a disciplined approach to recovery, a gentle discipline in your recovery. The first point is set aside specific times every day. So really work out, before you engage in your brain rewiring journey, what times am I going to do this practice, right? Don't let it be the case. Never ever let it be the case. Well, I mean, maybe it'll work for you. I don't know. But from my point of view, and the kind of person I am, I needed to work this out in advance. And then I'd know that I was going to stick with it. So for me, I felt that I should never ever let it be the case that I'd wake up in the morning and think, Well, when will I do my practice today? Oh, maybe I'll do it at 10 o'clock. And then 10 o'clock would come and, oh, well, I'll do it after lunch. And then, and before you know it, you haven't done it, right? So never let that be the case. Instead, establish certain times or moments in the day when that, automatically, when that moment comes, that's your time to drop everything else and go and do the practice, right? So it could be that you organise it via time. I did this quite a lot. So for me, for example, 8 a.m. was, that was my time. I went and did the practice. Now, I'm not saying that on the dot of 8 I went and did it, but as I saw on my watch, and I wore a watch during my 6 months rewiring, when I saw that it was coming up to 8, or just past 8, I'd know then that was the time, because that was established in advance. So it doesn't matter what anyone else was doing. It doesn't matter if I was talking to someone, or if I was online or whatever it might be. It doesn't matter. It all it's dropped. So it mightn't have been that exactly at 8 o'clock I went, but maybe by 20 past I was sitting and doing it, right? So you have a sense that this is the time when this is happening, okay? So in my case it was 8 o'clock, midday, and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and sometimes just before bed. So that's one way of doing it, establishing a rhythm of time when you know that you're going to be able to do it. And think about when you're less likely to be tired. So for me, first thing in the morning was good. Midday is good. I'm quite alert at that time. And 5 o'clock, you've passed the kind of afternoon snooze feeling. So that kind of thing. Think it out in advance, and then prioritize those times, and they become sacrosanct. Those times are to be guarded, right? Jealous? Never mind. The DNRS doesn't help with everything. I've said that before. They are to be guarded, right? Do not let those times be interrupted. And once you get into the habit and establish that habit, that those times are, in fact, when you do go and do the practice, that will become more and more natural. Now, travel, as you get better, you may travel, may disrupt that, or certain things may well disrupt those routines you set up. But on those days, you can indeed think, okay, how am I going to work my routine around travel, or whatever it is that will be different about that day. But for the most part, 80% of the time, it's quite likely that you will be in a position to have a fairly structured way of going about it. So protect those times. Now, it helps, of course, one assumes, and it's usually the case, that those with POTS are not working. So they don't have a job because they're too sick to work. So one is able and in a position to really set up these sort of schedules. However, you may have employment. You may have to have employment. Maybe your POTS is quite bad, but it's not totally debilitating. So you do have a job or a part-time job. But still, the same thing applies. That regardless of that, you still set aside your specific times and work those out in advance, and then you stick to them. So that would include work emails, or whatever it is. This is the priority. The brain rewiring is the priority, and that's the attitude you have to have. Otherwise, you will let it slip. And conversely, if you make it a priority and start doing it, you gain momentum. Okay. Now, so that's one way of establishing times in the day when you know you're going to be doing the practice, rather than sort of letting it be decided on any given day when you're going to do it, because that tends to let you slip, right? But you can also, it doesn't have to necessarily be by time. It could be by certain natural markers during the day. For example, before breakfast or after breakfast, or after lunch, or whatever it is. Some sort of point in the day, which will always be part of a day, right? Where naturally this is what I'm going to be doing now. When the light is first going, or whatever, if it's during winter, or whatever. Some sort of marker that it's time now to drop what I'm doing and go off and do the practice. And I made this point in another video, but when I was recovering, I regarded it almost as a quasi-monastic schedule. Now, although I'm not a particularly monkish person, in certain regards, I found that idea of the discipline very helpful. in that in a monastery, there's a time and space for everything. So when it's a question of they're doing their work or chores or prayers in their own cells, then they're doing that. When the bells ring, they have to go and drop everything, and they go to the service. So it's a question of realizing that setting up the times of your day, the structure of your day, to support you, so that you know that at a certain hour that's what you're doing. And then in between those times, you have, as it were, free time to do other stuff, right? So you get the core discipline, and you trust yourself with that core discipline the more you stick to it. And then you look forward to the periods in between your brain rewiring exercises. Not that they're unenjoyable, but you look forward to those periods in between, because then you can snatch at that time and do other things, right? So that's the first point. My second point is have a beautiful place to do your core practice. So really set up an environment which is supportive to you in doing your core practice, which you come to associate with doing the core practice, and something really beautiful that where people know not to disturb you, as if you were setting up a meditation practice, which in a way you are. So really to have a beautiful place where you can go and do it, or several beautiful places. Or if it's the summer and you have a garden, maybe there's a place in the garden that you can set up to go and do it. So something that kind of formalizes or ritualizes the process. The next point is technology. I've made this point in another video, the use of technology during recovery. But very briefly, there is nothing that will sap discipline more than the constant pinging of emails and checking of news websites and Facebook and all of that. Nothing that will ruin discipline more. Nothing that is more conducive, actually, to removing the kind of ritualized structure that I'm trying to suggest. Okay? Because once you get sucked into that stuff, time goes, right? What we want instead is to develop a sense that the day is long and slow and filled with space. And for that, you need to get off the computer, right? So I really recommend blocking a lot of distracting and distractive websites. I use an app called Freedom for that. And don't dismiss this, okay? Do not dismiss this. Do not think, oh, that doesn't apply to me. So most people are addicted, and they graze through the day. They graze one email after another, and they never live a fully self-activated life, because it's just, what's the next thing? What's the next notification? What's the next thing to deal with? And so sort of really structuring their own life is taken out of their hands. You cannot let this happen in recovery from POTS. You must ensure that the technology is kept to a minimum. And it's very hard to use willpower to do that. But you can use apps like Freedom, or enlist the help of family members. My dad, I asked him to actually take away my computer during recovery and set up a different password on it. And he's only allowed to give it to me for an hour a day. And often I didn't actually ask for it. So whatever it is, whatever it takes, this is a time for simplicity, right? It is a time for simplicity. You don't need the constant pinging, and it saps all willpower and discipline. Do not underestimate that, okay? A very, very important point. The next point is, during the day, you're also blocking what are known as pathways of the past, as you'll know if you're doing the practice. So it's not just a question of the core practice. And this also requires keeping discipline. And it can seem overwhelming at the start of the day. You think, oh, I'll have so many pathways of the past to block today. Oh, I might as well just not do any. But just remember that it's only one at a time. And it's very important to get into that attitude as well. This is not a question, don't allow yourself to be overwhelmed by the thought of, oh my God, I have to do an hour a day for 6 months. Or if you listen to someone like me, I'm like, do 2 hours a day, do 3 hours a day, because that's my personality, and I'm very sorry about that. But if you can, do. But anyway, you still get there with one, but anyway, never mind. So, that seems overwhelming. Like, I just won't even start, like, how am I going to do that? Because it is overwhelming when you think of it that way. I'm going to do 5 hours practice a day for 6 months. That would put anyone off. But actually, it's just one moment at a time. It's just one pathway of the past at a time. It's just one practice at a time. And it's just a flow of time. It's a flow of life. And it's one moment at a time. So regard, in fact, that sense of overwhelm as a pathway of the past. It's an unwise way of going about it. Instead, it's one pathway of the past at a time. And recovery from POTS is built piece by piece. It is built, it's like weaving a tapestry. Each time you do the practice, you weave a little bit of the tapestry, a little bit of some sort of new beautiful garment that you're creating. But it's not until the end of the 6 months that you actually see the whole sweater or jumper or wherever it is that you're, or beautiful ornate tapestry of some kind. It's not until the end that you see what it is you actually created. So get into that attitude. It's piece by piece. It's neuron by neuron. Okay. So it's moment by moment. And when you have it that way, it's much easier. Okay. Now, often you will feel when you have a pathway of the past, or when you're trying to start your core practice, oh, I don't feel like it. Oh, I really don't want to do this. Oh. You know, it's like the last thing you want to do. Do the practice for 10 seconds. And notice how the brain shifts once you start doing it. Just do it for 10 seconds. Just say to yourself, oh, I'll just do one of the DNRS core exercises for just 10 seconds. And then you'll see the resistance goes. Because once you get those different pathways activated, the brain then goes along with it. Because actually it's much more fun than resistance. So regarding resistance, it's very important when it comes to resistance, just do it for 10 seconds or a minute or whatever, but something small that seems manageable, and then you'll see that actually your brain will be happy to continue. Also, if you're not feeling the practice, if it's not eliciting a feeling response, so what? You're still rewiring your brain. It's not going to elicit a feeling response every time. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. You're still teaching your brain that life is safe. So it's just a sort of side point, but anyway. Yes, and as I said earlier, you know, even if it wasn't rewiring your brain from a devastating health condition, would you want to do the practice anyway? I think it's a very beautiful practice. So I would say, I asked myself this at the time, and the answer was yes. You might ask yourself the same thing too. But also, once you do get into it after several months and you're noticing the health improvements, as you rewire the core cause of POTS, and you start to have that feeling of, do I really want to do this? Ask yourself, truly, would you really rather not do the practice? Would you really rather not? And I'd be very hard-pressed to believe that you would answer that you really wouldn't rather do it. Because of the two, one is a higher value choice, which is pushing you towards something beautiful. And it's very hard, and the other is sort of giving up. And it's very hard when you put it that way to actually think, to say that, no, I wouldn't do this for myself. So try and give yourself potentially the permission not to do it, and say, would I really rather not do this? And once you've gained that momentum over several months, and you've seen the difference, I'd be very surprised if you would actually suddenly give up if you ask yourself that question. Now, of course, people slip up. I slipped up many times. Did I follow these ideals all the time? No, 70% of the time, I would say. People slip, we're human, so what? When you have slipped, when you've gone maybe a period of a few hours without doing the practice, just forgive yourself and come back. You've still made lots of positive changes up until then, and you'll be able to make lots more from that moment on, and you're still building on momentum. So if you slipped up for a while, forgive yourself and come back and re-engage. Now, these points I hope you found helpful. It's all about setting up an environment for practice, so that it's not just about willpower. It's about making an environment that is conducive to discipline. It's about knowing when you're doing the practice and just going and doing it. And these are all very important points, because otherwise what happens is it slips right? And some people never even start, okay, because they feel overwhelmed by it all. And then they start to justify to themselves why they're not doing it, right? Which is very natural and human, but it's still actually only because they're not doing it, ultimately. And really they're just frustrated at themselves. So they justify to themselves why they're not doing it, and they slip further and further and further, and before you know it, it's the program's fault, right? But it's not the program's fault. The program is just sitting there asking you to do something, but it is up to you to do it, right? This is a practice. It is a way of life for 6 months. It needs to be prioritized. It's not something you fit in, okay? It's not an optional extra. It is what you do. It is what you do. It is who you are over that time. So, if you've been finding that you've been justifying not doing it, forgive yourself for that, but start to do it. Start to prioritize it. It is the most important thing you will be doing in that 6 month period. And it needs to be given that core respect in your life, and allow yourself to build up the momentum with it. Break it down. It's one day at a time, one moment at a time, one practice at a time. And you just keep going. And I think that's all I want to say about that. Make this your full-time job. Full-time job being sick, full-time job getting well. It's a choice. It's a hard choice when you are sick to believe that it's possible to get better. It's scary. It's scary to have hope. But if it is true that POTS is caused by limbic system impairment, which is basically the same thing as autonomic nervous system dysfunction, which we know is true, then the DNRS, there is no other way of rewiring the brain out of crisis than this program. So even though it may seem simple or simplistic, the exercises, it's, if it is true that is the cause of POTS, then what other way is there possibly? What other way is there possibly to rewire the brain out of that crisis? Think on that. So take these thoughts on board. I hope they are helpful. Don't let it slip, and prioritize this in your life. And please share below any thoughts you have on how you maintain discipline. I'm not suggesting that these ideas will work for everyone at all, but some of them may, maybe all of them may in some cases. Maybe it more applies to my sort of personality, but and maybe other people who have different tips. So please leave them below if you do. But maintaining an environment which inculcates and encourages a gentle discipline towards recovery, a joyful discipline towards recovery, is very important. And don't feel that if you've never been disciplined before, that you can't do this, because you can. You can, right? Discipline doesn't have to be hard, doesn't have to be harsh. It's about resetting the priorities in your life and ensuring that you create the space to do the practice and knowing when you do the practice. And after that, it's just a question of breaking it down, moment by moment, and keeping going. And building that tapestry. Building a beautiful tapestry, stitch by stitch, which by the end of your 6 months will be something very beautiful indeed. That's all I want to say about that. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you a pleasant day wherever you are.